Welcome, traveler, to Forgotten Worlds for Sleep, a place where ancient stories breathe again, carried on the tide of memory and myth. Here, history and legend blend into soothing narrative, crafted to guide your mind into dreams while awakening your imagination. Each night, we journey across lost empires, timeless epics, and the whispers of forgotten ages. Tonight, we follow the Odyssey of Adysius, the man of many turns. From shipwrecks and monsters to gods and tempests, his long wandering across the seas reveals not only the trials of a hero, but the endurance of the human spirit. Over 20 years he struggled, not just against storms or swords, but against despair itself, until at last he returned to reclaim his home, his wife, and his throne. This is a tale of resilience, of cunning, of love tested by time, and of justice delivered by arrows and blood. Close your eyes now. Let the rhythm of his story carry you across the wine-dark sea, through palaces and tempests, through betrayal and reunion. For in every Odyssey lies our own longing, to wander, to endure, and finally, to come home. The smoke of Troy still curled black against the dawn when Adysius stood upon the shore, staring at the open sea. Behind him lay ruins, walls toppled, temples desecrated, towers burning. 10 years of blood and siege had ended at last, and the victors carried their spoils aboard waiting ships. Yet amidst the clamor of triumph, Adysius felt no joy. His eyes turned always west, toward Ithaca, toward the rocky homeland that had lived in his memory with aching clarity through every year of war. He longed for Penelope, weaving by her loom, for Telemachus, the son he had left as an infant and now imagined grown to manhood. His heart burned with the need for home, but homecoming, he knew, would not be simple. The Greeks had angered the gods with their arrogance and their desecration of Troy's sacred shrines. Already omens whispered of storms. Already the air was heavy with the wrath of Poseidon, whose son, the mighty Polyphemus, would one day stand as a terror in his path. Adysius felt in his bones that his journey would not be measured in days or weeks, but in years of wandering. Still, he commanded his men with the firmness of a king. They loaded chests of treasure, bronze tripods, woven cloth, golden vessels, spoils from the fallen city. They carried jars of wine, sacks of grain, and bundles of weapons. With horns sounding across the shore, the fleet unfurled its sails. Dozens of black ships moved out into the Aegean, oars flashing in rhythm, prows cutting toward open water. For a moment, as the coast of Troy shrank behind them, hope rose. They were men who had conquered the unconquerable, kings who had broken the mightiest city of the age. Surely the sea could not hold them. Surely fate would bend to their will. Adysius himself felt the salt wind fill his lungs and believed that soon, perhaps within weeks, he would walk the cliffs of Ithaca and clasp his wife's hands again. But the gods had other plans. Zeus, arbiter of fate, looked down with stern eyes. Poseidon's trident stirred the waves, his anger swelling at the arrogance of men who thought victory alone would shield them from divine consequence. And Athena, though she loved Adysius for his cunning, also knew that he must endure trials beyond imagining if he were to learn wisdom enough to reclaim his throne. The first storms rose quickly. Thunder cracked across the sky, and the sea turned black. The fleet scattered, ships swallowed in whirlpools, men cast screaming into the deep. Adysius's vessel, held steady by his command, endured, but the terror seared itself into every sailor's mind. Already the euphoria of victory curdled into dread. Already they began to whisper. Perhaps Troy had been the easy part. When dawn returned, they found themselves on strange waters, blown far from their intended course. Adysius stood at the prow, his cloak whipped by the wind, and stared at the horizon with narrowed eyes. He knew then that this was no simple voyage. This would be a struggle greater than the war itself, a contest not of armies, but of endurance, loyalty, and the human spirit. And yet, within him, the flame of home burned undimmed. Whatever gods conspired, whatever monsters rose from the depths, whatever storms tore at his sails, He would not turn aside, for Ithaca was more than a place. It was his identity, his promise, the thread that bound every suffering to a purpose. And though he did not know it yet, the long wandering had already begun. For days the winds drove Adysius and his weary crew across uncharted waters. The sea was calm now, but the memory of Troy's burning and Poseidon's storm weighed heavy on their minds. When at last they sighted land, hope flickered like a distant flame. A low, green shore stretched before them, fragrant with blossoms, the air thick with a sweetness that seemed to promise peace. The men, exhausted and hungry, cheered. Adysius ordered the anchors dropped and the ships drawn ashore. The place was unlike any they had known in years of war and wandering. Trees bent heavy with strange fruit, their blossoms carried by the breeze like drifting snow. A river ran clear and cool to the sea, and birdsong filled the air. Here was no spear, no tower, no enemy in sight, only tranquility. Eager to learn more, Adysius chose a small band of men and sent them inland to meet the inhabitants. Hours passed, yet the men did not return. Uneasy, he prepared to follow when at last they appeared again. But they walked with vacant smiles, their steps unhurried, eyes clouded as though in dream. They no longer carried their spears. "What has befallen you?" Adysius demanded, but the men only laughed softly, their voices slow. One held out a hand, offering blossoms of a pale golden flower. "Eat, my lord," he murmured. "Taste the lotus. All cares will fade. The sea, the war, the longing, it all vanishes. Here there is peace." Adysius recoiled. He saw at once what had happened. These flowers were no gift, but a snare more dangerous than any sword. His men who had eaten them no longer wished to return to Ithaca, no longer remembered Penelope's face or Telemachus's name. The lotus robbed them of memory and ambition alike, leaving them content to waste away in blissful stupor. He tested them, speaking of home, of honor, of the promise to return, but they only smiled sadly, shaking their heads. "Why strive?" one said. "Why suffer storms and hunger? Why chase shadows when happiness is here, in our hands?" Adysius felt anger rising, but beneath it fear, for the flower tempted even him. The fragrance was intoxicating, the promise of rest after decades of struggle nearly irresistible. To surrender, to let go of the burden of leadership, of pain, of longing. It called to him like a lullaby. For one shattering instant, he imagined laying aside his bow, his crown, his very name, and drifting into the lotus dream forever. But then Penelope's face flashed before him, the memory of her loom, her patience, her loyalty, the thought of Telemachus, grown but waiting, a son unrecognized by his father, Ithaca's cliffs and fields, the olive trees of his youth. These memories were his anchor, his truth. He spat upon the blossoms and roared at his men. With iron will, he dragged them back to the ships, binding them to the benches if need be. They wept and struggled, crying out for the lotus, their hands reaching back toward the shore. But Adysius forced them aboard, his heart breaking even as he did so. He knew that mercy here meant death of the spirit. Only by cruelty could he save them. The sails filled with wind once more, and the lotus coast fell behind. On deck, the bound men moaned and begged, their eyes haunted with longing for that sweet oblivion. Adysius stood above them, fists clenched, face stern. He knew they would hate him for it. Yet he also knew that if he had faltered, all would have been lost. As the shoreline faded into mist, he whispered to himself, "Better to suffer and remember than to forget and perish." Thus the Lotus Isle passed into memory, not as a battle of swords, but as a war of the mind. And in that war, Adysius had triumphed. But the sea stretched wide before him, and he knew this was only the beginning. Greater dangers still waited, darker choices yet to be made. The sea carried Adysius and his crew onward from the land of the Lotus, but the men still trembled. Some wept quietly at night, whispering of the bliss they had lost, while others cursed the cruel king who had bound them to the benches. Yet Odysseus's resolve did not waver. He knew the greater danger lay not in surrender, but in forgetting their purpose. Days later, they came upon a strange coast, rugged and wild, with cliffs that rose like teeth from the sea. Beyond lay meadows rich with sheep and goats, their bleating echoing across the water. The sight of food stirred the men's hunger, and Adysius guided them ashore. They found no city walls, no cultivated fields, no hearth smoke rising from houses, only open land, fertile but untended. At first it seemed a paradise. The men feasted on milk and cheese left in stone huts, filling their bellies at last. Yet Odysseus's keen eye saw something amiss. "This is no ordinary place," he murmured. "The people here live without law, without counsel, without ships. They are giants, savages who know nothing of hospitality." Despite his warning, curiosity drew them deeper inland to a cavern larger than any hall they had ever seen. Inside lay baskets of cheese, barrels of milk, and pens filled with fat lambs. The men clamored to seize what they could and flee, but Adysius hesitated. "Let us wait. Perhaps we will meet the master of this place and receive his gift of friendship." They kindled a fire, ate, and waited. Soon the earth trembled beneath heavy steps, and the air filled with the stench of rawhide and beast. The cavern mouth darkened as a shadow fell across it. A giant entered, taller than any man, his single eye blazing in the center of his brow. His arms were like tree trunks, his voice a thunderous growl. The Cyclops Polyphemus had returned. At first he spoke no greeting, but drove his flocks into the cave and rolled a boulder across the entrance. A stone so vast that no dozen men could have moved it. The crew shuddered, realizing they were trapped. Polyphemus turned his eye upon them, and his lips curled. "Strangers," he said, "you have come uninvited. Tell me, where's your ship? What brings you to my cave?" Adysius, ever cunning, sensed the danger. If he revealed their numbers, the giant would destroy them all. So he spun a lie. "Our ship was broken upon the rocks," he said, "and we few survivors come begging your hospitality, as custom demands." But Polyphemus only laughed, a sound like boulders grinding together. "Hospitality? I know no such law. My will is my law, and my hunger my guest friend." Without warning, he seized two men in his massive hands, dashed them against the stone, and devoured them raw. Blood spattered the ground. The crew screamed in horror, but the boulder barred escape. That night, the Cyclops slept, his breath foul and heavy, while the survivors wept in silence, fearing dawn. Yet Odysseus's mind worked ceaselessly. Escape was impossible while the giant lived. To kill him outright would trap them forever, for no man could move the stone. But perhaps cunning could succeed where strength could not. The next day, when Polyphemus returned, Adysius approached with wine taken from Troy, dark and strong. "Great lord," he said with feigned respect, "taste this gift, a drink worthy of your greatness." The Cyclops drank deeply, his eye gleaming with pleasure. "More," he roared. Again and again he drank until the wine dulled his senses. At last he swayed and slumped, muttering, "Tell me, little man, your name, that I may honor you when I feast upon you last." Adysius smiled coldly. "My name is Nobody." With that, the giant collapsed into drunken sleep. At once, Adysius and his men seized a great stake of olive wood, sharpened it in the fire, and together drove it into the Cyclops' eye. Polyphemus bellowed, thrashing, tearing at the stone walls. "Nobody has blinded me," he howled, so that his neighbors only laughed, thinking no one had harmed him. In the chaos, the men clung to the bellies of the sheep, and when Polyphemus rolled the stone aside to let his flocks graze, they slipped past him unseen. At last, they reached the ship, rowing furiously away from shore, but pride betrayed them. Adysius, exulting in victory, called back, "Know this, Cyclops. It was not Nobody, but Odysseus of Ithaca who blinded you." The giant roared in fury and raised his arms to the sky. "Hear me, Poseidon my father. Grant that Odysseus never reach his home." Or if fate decrees he must, let it be after long suffering, with all companions lost. The sea trembled, and Adysius's men turned pale. They knew then that a curse had been laid upon them, a doom from which none could easily escape. And Adysius, though his heart burned with regret at his reckless taunt, could not call the words back. The escape from Polyphemus's cave left Adysius's men shaken, their courage drained. They had seen companions crushed and devoured, heard the Cyclops' curse, and now every wave seemed to whisper Poseidon's wrath. Yet the sea carried them on, and after days of drifting, they came upon a floating island surrounded by towering bronze walls and cliffs that gleamed in the sun. This was the realm of Aeolus, keeper of the winds, favored of the gods. Adysius, weary but determined, guided his ship ashore. There they were greeted not by savages, but by a palace of shimmering stone, its halls filled with laughter and music. Aeolus himself appeared, a man crowned with feathers, his eyes bright with the currents of air, his presence restless as a storm. "Stranger," Aeolus said, "I know your name. Odysseus of Ithaca, the cunning king, breaker of Troy. The gods speak of you, and your plight moves me. You seek home, but the seas rage against you. Perhaps I may grant you passage." Adysius bowed low, offering tales of his wanderings and gifts from Troy. Aeolus listened with keen interest, then led him to a great chamber where the winds themselves were bound, 4 bags, each tied with silver cord, their skins bulging and trembling like beasts eager for release. "These are the winds of the world," Aeolus explained. "North, south, east, and west. All are mine to command. I give you this, a leather sack holding every storm wind. Guard it well. So long as you keep it sealed, fair breezes shall carry you straight to Ithaca." Hope flared within Adysius. For 9 days they sailed, the west wind at their backs, driving them swiftly across the sparkling sea. The men rowed little, the sail filled fat with promise. Each night Ithaca seemed nearer, and on the 10th day, the familiar outline of its cliffs appeared on the horizon. Joy swelled through the crew. Home, after years of war and wandering, was at last within reach. But joy turned to suspicion. The men had watched their king guard the leather sack day and night, never letting it out of his sight. Whisper by whisper, doubt spread. "He hoards treasure," one muttered. "Gold and silver given by Aeolus, kept hidden while we starve." Another spat. "We bled at Troy. We braved the Cyclops, yet he alone keeps the prize." Their hunger and envy overcame reason, as Adysius, exhausted from days without sleep, collapsed into slumber. The crew crept to the sack. With trembling hands, they loosed the cords. At once, the winds burst free with a howl that shook the sea. Gales roared from every direction, tearing the sail, snapping ropes, flinging the ship backward as though it were a leaf. The horizon of Ithaca vanished in an instant. Waves rose mountains high, and the men screamed as the storm carried them far from their homeland, back into the endless void of the ocean. When Adysius awoke, he saw not Ithaca's shores, but the same wild waters they had left behind. His heart broke within him. He seized the mast and cried out in anguish, but the storm only laughed in his ears. At last, when the gale subsided, they found themselves once more at Aeolus's island. Broken and desperate, Adysius returned to the palace, fell at the keeper's feet, and begged for mercy. But Aeolus recoiled as though burned. "Foolish man," he cried, "surely you are hated of the gods, for I sent you home with my gift, and yet fate turned you back. I dare not aid one cursed by heaven, begone from my island and never return." Shamed and cast out, Adysius staggered back to his ship. His men bowed their heads in silence, their guilt heavy upon them. For the first time, hope seemed a fragile dream, as fickle and fleeting as the winds themselves. They pushed once more into the sea, but now the oars bit sluggishly, and the air was heavy with despair. The memory of Ithaca so close, so cruelly lost, haunted them more than all the monsters of the deep. And Adysius, though his heart burned with fury at his men's folly, said nothing, For what leader could not bear the weight of his people's failure? He clenched his jaw and set his gaze upon the horizon once more, silently swearing that even this betrayal would not break his resolve. The sea, however, was far from finished with him. The sea carried Adysius and his weary men onward, but their spirits were broken. They had seen Ithaca vanish like a dream, blown from their grasp by folly and suspicion. Now, silence hung heavy over the decks. Each man rowed with empty eyes, afraid to meet his captain's gaze. Adysius himself stood at the prow, his face carved from stone, fury and sorrow locked deep inside. After many days, they sighted land, a coastline dotted with high cliffs and a wide base sheltered from the wind. The men, hungry and desperate, felt hope stir. Perhaps here they might find respite, food, and kindness. Adysius guided the fleet into the harbor, its waters calm, its walls of stone rising like protective arms. Yet even as they entered, unease prickled along his skin. The bay was too still, too silent. High cliffs enclosed them like the jaws of a trap. Nevertheless, his men cheered, and one ship was sent ahead to scout. A herald rode inland, carrying messages of peace. They found a town perched upon the cliffs, its gates looming wide. At first glance, it seemed prosperous, streets filled with carts, walls strong with stone. But as the men entered, they saw that the people were giants, taller than trees, their faces twisted with hunger. One of the scouts, seeking aid, approached the queen herself. She sat upon a towering throne, her shadow long across the floor. Her eyes gleamed red, and her smile was cruel. "Welcome, strangers," she said, her voice dripping mockery. "What gifts have you brought me? For your flesh, perhaps?" Before the men could answer, she leapt from her throne with inhuman speed, seized one by the arm, and devoured him raw, blood running down her chin. The others fled in terror, but horns blared across the city. From every street poured the Laestrygonians, giants wielding boulders and spears as thick as masts. Back in the harbor, Adysius watched in horror as shadows moved along the cliffs. Giants heaved stones the size of houses down upon the ships. The air filled with screams and splintering wood as masts snapped and hulls shattered. Men leapt into the sea, only to be speared like fish and hauled away to be devoured. Adysius shouted commands, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Cut the lines. Row for your lives." His own ship, stationed at the harbor's edge, narrowly escaped as his men hacked the moorings free and bent their backs to the oars. Behind them, every other vessel was crushed, every crew slaughtered. The bay ran red with blood. When at last they reached open sea, only one ship remained Adysius's. Of the once proud fleet that had left Troy, dozens of ships strong, all were gone. The sea was littered with wreckage, the cries of dying men fading into silence. The survivors sat slumped at their benches, faces gray with shock. Not one spoke. The air itself seemed poisoned by grief. Adysius looked upon them and felt the crushing weight of command. Once again, his choices had led them into horror. Once again, he bore the burden of their deaths. Yet he did not allow despair to master him. He gripped the tiller, eyes fixed upon the horizon, and swore to guide the last of his crew home. Though deep inside he knew the gods had only begun to test him. The wind rose again, filling the tattered sails, carrying them away from the land of the cannibals. But the men no longer sang as they rowed, no longer spoke of Ithaca with hope. Instead, they stared into the sea, haunted by the sight of giants feasting on their brothers, and by the knowledge that fate was hunting them step by step across the endless waters. For Adysius, the path ahead had narrowed. From many ships, only one remained. From many voices, only a few still answered his call. Yet he knew, as long as one oar struck the water, as long as one heart still beat in defiance, the dream of home endured. The lone ship sailed on through endless waters, haunted by loss. The memory of the Laestrygonians lingered like a nightmare. Comrades crushed by stones, torn apart like cattle, devoured while still screaming. Only one ship remained of the great fleet that had left Troy. The sea was wide and empty, and despair lay heavy upon the crew. When at last they came upon a new land, relief surged like a desperate tide. The island was lush and green, its forests alive with birdsong, its hills crowned with smoke curling gently into the sky. From the shore, wild boars and deer roamed in abundance, and the scent of fresh water drifted on the wind. Adysius, cautious though weary, sent half his men inland to explore. Among them was Eurylochus, his second in command, a man both loyal and skeptical, whose suspicion often saved lives. The men followed a winding path through dense woods until they came upon a great house standing in a glade. Its walls shimmered like bronze, its doors carved with strange symbols, and smoke rose from its chimney like a beacon. From within came the sound of singing. A woman's voice, rich and alluring, wove through the air like silk. Entranced, the men drew near, and when the doors opened, they beheld her, Circe, the enchantress, her beauty radiant, her gaze calm and unreadable. She welcomed them with a smile, offering golden cups of wine and platters of food. Weary from hunger and grief, they accepted eagerly, all but Eurylochus. Suspicion tightened his chest. He lingered outside, watching, and when his companions drank deep of the wine and ate their fill, Circe raised her wand and spoke a single word. In an instant, the men fell writhing to the ground, their limbs twisting, their bodies shrinking. Where soldiers had stood, now pigs squealed, their eyes wide with terror. Circe drove them into pens, laughing softly at their fate. Eurylochus fled back to the shore, his heart pounding, and burst upon the camp with wild eyes. "The witch," he cried. "She has turned them into swine. I saw it with my own eyes." Adysius rose at once, seizing his sword. Fury burned within him, yet Eurylochus grasped his arm. "Do not go," he begged. "You will share their fate. Leave them. We still have enough to row for Ithaca." But Adysius shook him off. "I will not abandon my men to slavery and death. Whatever spell she wields, I will break it." He strode into the forest, his heart steel, but fate intervened. From the shadows appeared Hermes, the messenger of the gods, swift and bright. The young god, his eyes filled with mischief and wisdom, pressed a sprig of shining herb into Odysseus's hand. "Moly," he said, "with this you will resist her spells. When she strikes, rush upon her with your blade. She will submit, and then you may demand her oath." Adysius bowed in gratitude, and with the herb's power, he entered Circe's hall. She greeted him as before, offering wine. When he drank, her wand rose, her lips forming the spell, but nothing happened. He lunged, his sword flashing, and pressed it to her throat. Circe gasped, her eyes wide, then softened into laughter. "Brave man," she whispered. "No mortal has ever resisted me. You are more than human. You are destined." She swore an oath by the gods not to harm him, and with a wave of her wand, she restored his men to human form. They stumbled back, dazed and shaken, but alive. What followed was strange beyond reason. The witch who had enslaved them became their hostess. She offered baths, clothing, and feasts rich beyond imagining. Her hall filled with music and warmth, her bed with promises of comfort. For a year they lingered there, drinking, feasting, forgetting the salt sting of the sea. And Adysius, though his heart longed for Ithaca, found himself torn. Circe was not like the lotus. Her gifts did not erase memory, but dulled its pain. With her, he knew pleasure without suffering, peace without struggle. Many nights he lay awake, staring at the beams of her ceiling, asking himself if the gods had brought him here to end his wanderings at last. But the face of Penelope haunted him still. Telemachus's voice echoed in his mind, though he had never truly heard it. Duty bound him tighter than any spell, and when at last a year had passed, he rose and told Circe, "I must go. My home waits. My destiny lies beyond your halls." She did not weep, but her eyes shone with something like sorrow. "Then listen," she said. for your path grows darker still. You must journey to the land of the dead, seek Tiresias the prophet, and learn from him the will of the gods. Only then may you find your way home." Thus, from comfort he was cast back into dread. But Adysius knew, better to face death with purpose than life without meaning. And so, once more, he set sail, this time not for home, but for the very gates of Hades. When Circe spoke of the underworld, Adysius's men blanched with terror. They had braved storms, giants, and cannibals, but the thought of descending among the dead chilled them to the marrow. Yet Adysius's eyes remained steady. He knew the way home lay not through strength of arms, but through the counsel of those who had crossed the threshold of life itself. Under Circe's guidance, they sailed northward, the winds cold and sharp, until they reached the shadowed edge of the world. There the ocean narrowed, the waves stilled, and an eerie gloom fell upon the sea. No bird sang, no sun pierced the mist. The men rowed in silence, their faces pale, as though already among the dead. At last, they reached a desolate shore where black poplars grew, and the ground reeked of decay. Here, Circe had said, the veil between living and dead grew thin. Here, Adysius must perform the rites that would summon the spirits. With trembling hands, he dug a trench in the earth, poured libations of honey, milk, and wine, and sprinkled barley meal. Then, with his sword in hand, he slit the throats of black sheep, their blood steaming as it flowed into the pit. At once, the air shifted. Shadows stirred. From the darkness, pale figures emerged, souls of the dead, drawn by the offering. They came in swarms, soldiers fallen at Troy, women taken before their time, elders bent with sorrow. Their cries filled the air, thin and piercing, a chorus of grief. The crew shrank back, clutching one another, but Adysius stood firm, sword raised to ward them off until the one he sought appeared. And then he came, Tiresias, the blind prophet, his shade rising from the blood. His hollow eyes glowed with sight beyond sight, and his voice was heavy with the weight of fate. "Odysseus, man of cunning," Tiresias intoned, "you seek to return home, yet doom shadows your path. Hear me well, the gods do not grant smooth sailing. Poseidon hunts you for blinding his son, yet you may still endure, if you master your hunger, if your men restrain their greed. When you come to the island of Helios, do not touch his sacred cattle. If you do, ruin shall fall upon all. You alone may live, but in suffering and despair." Adysius' heart sank, for he knew his men's weakness. But Tiresias was not done. "When you return, you will find your halls overrun by suitors, men devouring your wealth and courting your wife. Blood will flow before your throne is restored, and even then, your journey is not ended. You must take an oar and walk inland, until you find men who know nothing of the sea, who mistake your oar for a winnowing fan. There you must plant it in the earth and sacrifice to Poseidon. Only then will peace come to you, and only then may death find you at last, gentle and from the sea." The word struck like iron. Adysius bowed his head, the weight of destiny heavy on his shoulders. Before he could answer, another voice pierced the gloom. It was Anticlea, his mother, her ghost pale and weeping. "My son," she whispered, "why have you come here, alive among the dead?" Adysius' throat tightened. He reached toward her, but his arms passed through mist. She told him of Ithaca's sorrow, of Penelope's endless waiting, of Telemachus' loneliness, of Laertes wasting away in grief. Tears filled Adysius' eyes, yet he forced himself to listen, for her words were a map of what awaited him at home. Others came, comrades from Troy, their bodies broken by war, their voices bitter with betrayal. Achilles himself appeared, towering and radiant in death. "Do not speak to me of glory," he said coldly. "Better to be a slave on earth than a king among the dead." His words pierced Adysius, stripping away the illusions of honor. War had given them nothing but graves. At last, Tiresias' prophecy rang final in his ears. "Avoid the cattle of the sun. endure suffering, reclaim your home in blood, and wander once more before peace. The truth was bitter, but Adysius accepted it. For what choice had he? Fate could not be denied, only endured. With trembling hands, he poured libations once more, sealing the rite. The shades wailed, drawn back into darkness, until only silence remained. The trench was empty, the blood dried, the earth cold once more. His men looked to him, eyes wide with fear. Adysius sheathed his sword and said only, "We live, and so we go on." The sea was calm when Adysius's black-prowed ship left the haunted shores of the underworld, but the men rowed in silence. The visions of death still clung to them, chilling their bones. Even the wind seemed reluctant to carry them forward, as though the very air feared what lay ahead. It was Circe who had warned them. Beyond this point, you will encounter the Sirens, whose voices no man can resist. They sit in a meadow filled with bones, surrounded by rotting flesh of sailors who could not withstand their song. If you hear them, you will leap from your ship into the sea, desperate to reach them and never return. Only if you prepare with cunning will you survive. Adysius had listened well, for his strength had always been in strategy, not brute force. As their ship approached the deadly waters, he called his men together. "Friends," he said, "you must trust me now more than ever. Melt the beeswax and press it into your ears. You will not hear their song, and so you will row safely past. But I must hear it. I must know the truth they promise. Bind me to the mast, hand and foot, and no matter how I beg, no matter how I command, you must not release me." The men obeyed, though unease flickered in their eyes. To sail deaf was frightening, to bind their captain even more so. Yet they trusted him, and with wax sealed in their ears, they tied him fast to the mast with ropes pulled tight. Then the ship entered the Sirens' waters. At first, there was only silence, broken by the steady creak of oars and the wash of water against the hull. Then, faint and sweet, a voice rose from the shore. It was no ordinary song. It was the sound of longing itself, woven into melody. Another voice joined, then another, harmonizing in notes so pure they seemed to split the soul. "Adysius," they sang, calling his name as though they had always known him. "Come closer, great wanderer, favored of the gods. We know you. We know all the suffering you have endured. We can tell you what awaits. All knowledge is here, of Troy, of Ithaca, of the gods themselves. Come ashore, and you will leave us wiser than all men." The effect was immediate. Adysius's heart surged with desire. His mind, weary of trials, longed for answers, for certainty. He strained against his bonds, shouting to his crew, "Release me! Do you not hear them? They promise wisdom, everything we seek. Untie me now." But the men, deaf to his cries, rowed on. Sweat poured from their brows, muscles straining against the current. They saw their captain thrash, his face twisted in desperation, but his commands fell on ears sealed with wax. The Sirens' voices grew sweeter, more insistent. "Stay with us, Adysius. No more wandering, no more storms. Only truth, only peace. Your name will live forever in song." Bound to the mast, Adysius screamed until his voice broke. His eyes filled with tears. For a moment, he felt his will slipping, the ropes cutting into his skin as he fought them. Never had he felt temptation so powerful, not even in Circe's arms, not even with Calypso's promise of immortality. The Sirens promised not pleasure, but knowledge, the very thing his cunning soul craved most. But the ship pressed on. Stroke by stroke, the oars drove them forward. The voices followed, rising in crescendo, filling the air with unbearable sweetness. Then slowly, they began to fade. The meadow of bones disappeared into mist. The song broke into silence. Adysius sagged against the mast, chest heaving, sweat and tears mingling on his face. He had survived, but barely. The men, unsealing their ears once the danger had passed, looked at him with awe. They had seen their captain trembling like a madman, Yet he had endured. When they untied him, Adysius's voice was hoarse. "You did well," he told them. "Never release me again, no matter what I say." His gaze turned back to the horizon, where new trials surely awaited. The Sirens' song left its mark upon him. He had heard the call of forbidden knowledge and resisted, but the memory of it lingered. He now understood the double-edged nature of wisdom. It could save, but it could also destroy. Some truths were meant to remain veiled. Some songs were better left unheard. As the ship moved forward into uncharted waters, Adysius carried not only the scars of battle, but the echo of voices that would haunt him forever. After surviving the Sirens' haunting song, the sea once again opened before them, vast and indifferent. Yet Adysius knew the greatest trial still loomed ahead, the twin terrors of Scylla and Charybdis. Circe had described them in dreadful detail, and her words echoed now in his mind. To one side, she had warned, lurks Scylla, a monster with 12 legs and 6 serpent heads, each with triple rows of fangs. She dwells in a cave high upon the cliffs and snatches sailors from their decks, devouring them alive. To the other side lies Charybdis, the whirlpool. 3 times each day she sucks the sea down to the abyss, then vomits it forth again, destroying any ship caught in her grasp. To steer too close to her means certain doom. Better to sacrifice a few men to Scylla than to lose all to Charybdis. These choices weighed upon Adysius like chains. How does a leader decide who lives and who dies? How does one walk willingly into the jaws of loss? Yet no escape was possible. As the ship approached the straits, the air grew heavy. Clouds gathered, and the sea hissed with foam. Adysius stood tall at the prow, though inside his heart churned as violently as the waters ahead. "Row steady," he commanded. "Keep close to the cliffs. Do not falter." He did not tell them of Scylla's fangs. He chose silence, for what good would fear serve? Better they row blind than panic and scatter. The cliffs loomed on either side, black and sheer. To starboard, the water churned with ominous force, a great whirlpool forming in its depths. The ship tilted toward it, the current dragging them closer. The men strained at the oars, sweat pouring down their brows, their muscles screaming in defiance. Hard to port. Adysius cried, steering them toward the rocks, toward Scylla. He knew what would come, though his men did not. And then she struck. From her cave, the monster lunged, her 6 heads darting like serpents, faster than the eye could follow. Screams split the air. Adysius whirled around just in time to see his men lifted from the deck, their legs kicking, arms flailing, voices calling his name. "Adysius, help us." But there was no help to give. One by one, the heads sank back into the cave, sailors writhing in their jaws. Bones crunched. The sea turned red. Adysius stood frozen, sword in hand, but useless against the horror above. He could only watch as 6 of his strongest, loyal companions were devoured alive. Their cries echoed in his ears, each one a wound deeper than steel could cut. The ship lurched forward, leaving the scene of carnage behind. The men rowed on in grim silence, their faces pale, their eyes wide with horror. None dared to speak. Adysius, though, could not still his mind. He had chosen this path. He had sacrificed them, and though reason told him there was no other way, guilt gnawed at his heart. He, who had led them across so many perils, could not save them from this fate. It was the cruelest test of leadership, not in victory, but in loss. To carry on when others had fallen, to bear the screams of friends, and yet keep moving forward. As the straits narrowed behind them and the sea calmed once more, Adysius stood at the stern, staring back at the cliffs. His men avoided his gaze. Some looked at him with silent accusation, others with weary resignation, but all knew their lives were bound to his choices, for better or worse. He whispered to himself, words the men could not hear. "May the gods forgive me. May their souls find peace." The ship pressed on, diminished but not destroyed. Scylla had taken her toll, but Charybdis had been avoided. 6 lives lost instead of all. Yet the cost weighed like an anchor upon Adysius's heart. In this moment, heroism lost its glamour. It was no longer about cunning tricks or victories won. It was about endurance, bearing the unbearable, carrying grief without faltering. The burden of leadership was not glory but sacrifice. Adysius tightened his grip on the tiller. The journey was not yet done. Ahead lay Helios's island, where temptation would test his men more cruelly than any monster. But the memory of Scylla's jaws would never fade. For the rest of his days, when he closed his eyes, he would hear them. The screams of companions lifted toward the monster's cave, begging for salvation he could not give. The sea was still heavy with grief when Adysius's weary crew reached the shores of Thracia, the sacred island of Helios, god of the sun. Circe and Tiresias had both warned him, "Touch not the cattle of the sun, for they are holy. If you do, destruction will follow." Adysius carried these words like fire in his chest. Yet the gods are cruel. A storm blew up, sudden and violent, and drove them ashore against their will. For days, then weeks, the winds howled, trapping them on the island. Their supplies dwindled, and soon the men gnawed at whatever scraps they could find. Birds caught by hand, fish pulled from the shallows. Hunger carved hollows into their cheeks, and resentment simmered beneath the surface. Before the altar, Adysius prayed, "Father Zeus, grant us mercy. Let the winds calm so we may leave this place without sin." He prayed long into the night, until exhaustion closed his eyes. But absence is opportunity. While he prayed, his men gathered around the fire. Among them, Eurylochus, strongest of voice, whispered what all had thought, but none dared to speak. "Are we to starve on this island, while fat cattle graze before our eyes? Better to die by the gods' wrath than to waste away slowly. Let us sacrifice to Helios. Let us feast. And if punishment comes, so be it. At least we will not die in hunger." The men murmured their assent, their eyes wild with desperation. Temptation proved stronger than loyalty. When night fell, they drove the finest of the golden cattle into the clearing and slaughtered them, chanting hollow prayers as though words could cleanse their sin. Flames rose, and the smell of roasting meat filled the air. They feasted until their bellies ached, laughter mixing with the crackle of fire. They justified themselves with promises. "We will build a temple when we return. We will repay Helios with sacrifice." But the smoke carried higher than their excuses. On Olympus, Helios saw. His voice thundered across the heavens. "Father Zeus, they have slaughtered my sacred herd. If vengeance is not given, I will cast my light into the underworld and leave the earth in darkness." Zeus nodded grimly. "Fear not. I shall strike when they leave the island. Their ships shall shatter, their bones scatter, and Adysius alone will survive to taste despair." Meanwhile, Adysius returned from prayer to the smell of flesh. His heart sank. The deed was done. He raged at them, cursing their folly, but the men only lowered their eyes, their hunger sated, their doom sealed. That night, strange omens filled the air. The hides of the slaughtered cattle writhed upon the ground as if alive. The meat on the spits bellowed like oxen. Even the fire seemed to twist unnaturally. The men grew pale, their laughter curdling into fear, but it was too late. At last, the storm abated, and they set sail once more, leaving behind the cursed island. The sea was deceptively calm, the sky bright. For a brief moment, hope flickered. They had eaten. They had survived. Perhaps the gods would forgive. Then the horizon darkened. Clouds gathered, black and vast, rolling toward them with terrible speed. Thunder roared. Lightning split the heavens. The sea heaved like a living thing. Zeus struck. A bolt of fire shattered the mast, splintering wood and sending flames across the deck. The sail tore like parchment. The ship lurched violently, and waves taller than towers crashed upon them. One by one, the men were thrown into the sea, their cries lost in the roar of the storm. Adysius clung to the mast, lashed by wind and water, helpless as his companions vanished beneath the waves. Their fate was sealed by their own hunger, their defiance of divine law. When at last the sea stilled, all that remained was wreckage. Alone, Adysius drifted, clinging to the mast and keel bound together into a makeshift raft. His heart was broken, his ship destroyed, his men gone. For 9 days he drifted across the endless waters, the sun burning by day, the stars cold by night. His body weakened, his mind tormented by the memory of their final feast, of laughter turning to screams. On the 10th dawn, the current carried him to Ogygia, the island of Calypso, where a new trial awaited. But for now, he floated between despair and endurance, cursed to live when all others had perished. The prophecy of Tiresias had come true. He alone survived. The wreckage of his ship had long sunk beneath the waves, and Adysius alone drifted across the open sea. He clung to the broken mast and keel lashed together, his body battered, lips cracked from salt and sun. Hunger gnawed at his belly, thirst burned his throat, but still he endured. Fate had stripped him of everything, his men, his ship, his hope. Yet his spirit clung to life with desperate tenacity. For days the sea carried him, a prisoner on a fragile raft. Sometimes the water lay calm, glittering beneath the sun. Other times, storms rose suddenly, tossing him like a leaf. Yet worse trials still awaited, for the path home wound once more past familiar terrors. Ahead, the sea churned unnaturally, the waters twisting into a vast whirlpool. It was Charybdis, the same monster he had narrowly avoided when steering his ship past Scylla. Now, without oars, without crew, he drifted straight toward her gaping maw. The roar was deafening, like 1,000 rivers pouring into the earth. The sea dropped away as Charybdis inhaled, dragging the raft toward its abyss. Adysius' heart pounded. He clung to the mast, his body shaking with exhaustion, knowing death loomed only moments away. In desperation, he cast his eyes upward and saw a fig tree clinging stubbornly to the cliff above. With a final surge of will, he leapt from the raft, fingers clawing at the branches. Splinters tore his skin, muscles screamed, but he clung fast. Below him, the whirlpool swallowed the raft, splintering it into fragments. He hung suspended, watching the sea collapse into a cavernous void. The air stank of brine and death. For hours he clung there, the tree his only salvation. 3 times the sea roared. 3 times it swelled and crashed, each cycle threatening to wrench him free. His arms numbed, his grip weakened, but still he endured. Then, at last, Charybdis spewed forth the shattered remains of his raft. It bobbed on the surface, spinning amid the foam, summoning the last of his strength. Adysius released the tree and plunged into the sea. With gasping breaths, he hauled himself onto the wreckage, tying the fragments together once more. His body trembled with exhaustion, but his spirit refused to break. For 9 days more he drifted across the endless waters, sustained only by the will to survive. The sun blazed mercilessly by day. The stars wheeled silently by night. Dreams haunted him, of Penelope weaving at her loom, of Telemachus grown tall and searching for a father he might never see again, of Ithaca's hills bathed in golden light. These visions pulled him onward, though his body weakened. At last, on the 10th dawn, the sea delivered him to a shore unlike any he had seen before. Ogygia, island of Calypso. Its forests were thick with cedar and cypress, its meadows blooming with violet and crocus. Birds sang sweetly in the trees, and the air smelled of cedar smoke and ripe fruit. Here, for the first time in years, he stepped onto solid ground. His body collapsed upon the sand, the waves lapping gently at his feet. He had endured storms, monsters, and divine wrath. He had lost all, yet lived still. But the gods were not finished with him. From the forest came Calypso, the immortal nymph whose beauty shone brighter than dawn. She looked upon the broken hero with pity, and in her heart, love stirred. Adysius had survived the sea. Now he would face a different kind of trial, not of endurance, but of desire. When Adysius opened his eyes, he found himself no longer adrift upon endless waters, but lying upon a soft bed of moss in a cavern that glowed with warm firelight. The air smelled sweet, cedar smoke, lavender, and freshly baked bread. Beside him moved a figure radiant as dawn itself, Calypso, daughter of Atlas, nymph of the Isle of Ogygia. Her hair fell in golden waves, her eyes shimmered with the green of deep forests, and her voice was gentle as running water. She had found him half dead upon her shore, and in her immortal compassion, or perhaps something deeper, she had nursed him back to life. "You are safe now," she said softly, placing food and drink before him. "The sea has tormented you long enough. Rest here, and let the storms trouble you no more." For days he lingered, his wounds healing, his strength slowly returning. The cave was warm, the food abundant, the island serene. Birds sang in the meadows, streams bubbled through groves of cypress and cedar, and the sea lay calm around the shore. After years of terror and grief, Ogygia felt like paradise. Yet it was a paradise gilded with chains. For Calypso soon revealed the depth of her desire. "Stay with me, Adysius," she urged. "Be my husband. Rule this island at my side. I will give you what no mortal can possess, immortality. You will never grow old, never suffer again. Your name will endure forever." The offer shimmered like gold before him. After all he had endured, the loss of comrades, the fury of gods, the torment of sea and storm, how could he not be tempted? Immortality, peace, endless love. No more wandering, no more grief. A life free of struggle. But with each dawn, as Calypso's arms enfolded him, his heart turned inward to a different image, Penelope. He saw her at her loom, weaving by day, unraveling by night, holding faith through 2 decades of absence. He thought of Telemachus, a boy grown into manhood without a father's guiding hand. He thought of Ithaca, his kingdom left in decay. The sweetness of immortality soured in his mouth. What was eternal life without those he loved? What was endless time if it meant abandoning his name, his duty, his humanity? Yet he was trapped, though his heart yearned for home. He had no ship, no crew, no wind to carry him back. Calypso's island was both sanctuary and prison, a golden cage gilded with desire. For 7 long years he remained, caught between longing and resignation. Sometimes he gave himself to Calypso's embrace, his body surrendering though his heart resisted. Sometimes he sat alone upon the shore, staring westward across the empty sea, his eyes burning with unspoken grief. At last, the gods took pity. Athena, ever his patron, spoke before the council of Olympus. "Shall Adysius suffer forever? Has he not endured enough? It is time his fate be fulfilled." Zeus nodded, and Hermes, messenger of the gods, flew down with winged sandals to Ogygia. Entering Calypso's fragrant cave, he delivered the decree. Zeus commands, release the mortal. It is not his destiny to remain here, nor to take immortality. His path lies homeward. Provide him a raft, provisions, and let him go. Calypso's heart broke with fury and sorrow. She loved him truly, though her love was possessive. "Cruel gods," she cried, "you envy my joy. You begrudge me this mortal's love. What is immortality if I must suffer loneliness for eternity?" Yet even she could not defy Zeus. With bitterness veiled by grace, she told Adysius, "I would have made you immortal, kept you forever at my side. Yet the gods command otherwise. Go then, if your heart still clings to Ithaca. But know this, you will never find another who loves you as I have." Tears filled her eyes as she guided him to the shore. There, she provided tools and timber, teaching him how to shape a raft. For days he worked, his hands steady, his mind fixed on the horizon. Calypso brought cloth for sails, food, and fresh water. At last, the vessel was ready. On the dawn of his departure, she stood beside him, her hair unbound, her beauty radiant with grief. "Farewell, Adysius. May the gods be kind to you, though they rarely are." He looked upon her with gratitude and sorrow. "You saved my life," he said simply, and though my heart belongs elsewhere, I will not forget you." With that, he pushed the raft into the waves, the sail catching the wind. The island of Ogygia grew smaller behind him, a golden dream fading into mist. Ahead stretched the wide sea, and beyond it, the hope of home. Adysius had refused immortality for the sake of love and duty. It was a choice that defined him, not the cunning tricks, not the battles won, but the refusal to abandon his humanity. His journey was far from over, but in that moment, he had already triumphed. The sea carried Adysius onward from Calypso's golden prison, his raft skimming across the waves with newfound freedom. Yet freedom upon the sea was fragile. Poseidon, who still burned with wrath over the blinding of his son Polyphemus, rose from the deep and saw the mortals sailing homeward. "So the gods conspire against me," the Earthshaker thundered. "They free him from Ogygia, grant him calm winds, and let him sail unchallenged? Not while I rule the sea." He summoned a storm so fierce the heavens themselves seemed to split. Waves towered like mountains, wind shrieked, and Adysius's fragile raft shattered like driftwood. Once again, he was hurled into the abyss, clinging desperately to planks as the sea tried to claim him. But fate had other designs. Ino, the sea goddess, once mortal, took pity on him. Rising from the foam, she offered him her veil, shimmering white as foam. "Wrap this around you, wanderer," she urged. "It will keep you safe. Swim for the shore. When you find land, cast it back into the sea." Exhausted, battered, yet unyielding, Adysius obeyed. For 2 days he swam, the waves beating against him, his limbs aching. At last, on the 3rd dawn, he staggered upon the shore of Scheria, land of the Phaeacians. He collapsed in the sand, half dead, salt-crusted, and torn by exhaustion. Yet destiny had guided him well, for the Phaeacians were a people favored by the gods, lovers of song, dance, and hospitality. Here, his final test before home would unfold. It was Nausicaa, the daughter of King Alcinous, who first discovered him. She had come to the river with her maidens to wash linen, their laughter echoing like birdsong across the meadow. At the sight of the ragged stranger, her attendants fled in fear. But Nausicaa, filled with courage, stood her ground. "Who are you, traveler?" she asked, her voice steady though her heart raced. Adysius, crouched in shame, covered himself with leaves. "I am but a man broken by the sea," he said carefully. "Grant me water to wash the salt from my skin, and cloth to cover my nakedness, and I shall bless you forever." Moved by compassion, Nausicaa offered him garments and guided him toward her father's palace. Yet she instructed him to enter the city alone, so as not to stir gossip. "If you win my mother's favor," she said, "you will find safe passage to your homeland." And so Adysius came to the palace of Alcinous and Arete. The hall glittered with bronze and gold, its floors gleaming like the sea itself. The people welcomed him, for the Phaeacians honored strangers as sacred guests under the eyes of Zeus. At first, he concealed his name, telling only that he was a wanderer seeking shelter. But when the bard Demodocus sang of the Trojan War, the tears upon his face betrayed him. He wept like a child, his heart pierced anew by memories of battle and loss. Alcinous, seeing his sorrow, pressed him gently. "Tell us who you are, stranger, for your grief is not of common men. Surely you are touched by destiny." Thus Adysius revealed his name at last, and before the court of the Phaeacians, he recounted the story of his wanderings. He spoke of Troy, of the Cyclops, of Circe and the Sirens, of Scylla and Charybdis, of the slaughtered cattle of Helios, of Calypso's embrace. Each tale unfolded like a tapestry, weaving terror and wonder, love and despair. The hall fell silent as though even the torches leaned in to listen. For the first time, Adysius told a story not as survivor, but as storyteller. He relived his grief, his choices, his losses, giving shape to the burdens that had nearly crushed him. And in the telling, something shifted. His identity, battered by years of wandering, took form again in the eyes of his listeners. The Phaeacians were moved beyond measure. King Alcinous declared, "It shall not be said that a man so worthy shall suffer longer. Tomorrow, my swiftest ships will bear you home. Gifts will be laid at your feet, treasures worthy of your trials. For though the gods have tested you, we will honor you." That night, feasting filled the hall, but for Adysius, the music and laughter were bittersweet. He had found kindness, but his heart longed for Ithaca. The journey was nearly at its end, yet he feared what awaited him there. Would Penelope still wait? Would Telemachus recognize him? Or would strangers rule his hall, and his name be forgotten? As he lay down to sleep in the palace of Alcinous, his heart beat with a mingling of hope and dread. The sea had carried him far, but the final shore would test him more deeply than any storm. The swift black ships of the Phaeacians glided across the waves with a grace beyond mortal craft. Their oars did not splash. Their sails caught winds as if thought itself carried them forward. And so, in a single night, they bore Adysius homeward, across seas that had taken him 10 years to cross alone. As dawn broke, Ithaca lay shrouded in silver mist. Quiet waves lapped against the shore. The sailors, loyal to their king's command, laid Adysius sleeping gently upon the sand, his chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm for the first time in decades. Beside him, they placed the gifts of the Phaeacians, chests heavy with gold, silver, bronze, and fine garments, wealth enough to restore a kingdom. Then, silently, they returned to their ship and vanished across the horizon, leaving no witness but the whisper of the tide. When Adysius stirred, he found himself alone upon the unfamiliar shore. Rising to his feet, he looked around and saw only fog, rocks, and the low cry of seabirds. His heart clenched in uncertainty. Where am I? Have the Phaeacians deceived me, set me down in some strange land to be rid of me? He wandered inland, confusion growing with every step. The trees seemed familiar yet strange, the hills both known and foreign. Long absence had blurred memory, and doubt clouded his mind. At last, a figure appeared before him, a young shepherd, staff in hand, with eyes keen as the hawk's. "Stranger," the shepherd said, "what land is it you seek? For you stand upon Ithacan soil." Adysius's heart leapt, but caution tempered his joy. Even here, on the ground of his birth, deceit could lurk. He wove a tale, claiming to be a warrior from distant Crete come by accident of the sea. The shepherd only smiled. Her form shimmered, and in an instant, Athena herself stood before him, radiant in armor, eyes flashing with immortal light. "Cunning as ever, Adysius," she said, her voice both fond and mocking. "Even when home at last, your first thought is to weave lies. But it is well, for here, in Ithaca, cunning will serve you more than force. Your hall is filled with suitors, arrogant men devouring your wealth, seeking your wife. If you walk openly, they will kill you before you can lift your bow. You must move unseen." Adysius bowed low, tears filling his eyes at the sight of his immortal patron. "Goddess," he said, "you have stood by me through all my wanderings. Grant me now the strength to reclaim what is mine." Athena touched him with her staff, and at once his form withered into that of an old beggar. His skin grew wrinkled, his back stooped, his eyes clouded, his tunic ragged and filthy. No suitor would see a king in such a figure, only a worthless wanderer. "Go now to the hut of Eumaeus, your loyal swineherd," Athena instructed. "There you will find both shelter and truth. In disguise, you shall learn who remains faithful and who has betrayed you. In disguise, you shall weave the trap that will destroy the suitors. And when the moment comes, I will be at your side." Then she vanished, leaving only the whisper of wind among the olives. Adysius gazed down at his ragged hands, feeling both humiliation and resolve. To return as king, he must first walk as beggar. To reclaim his throne, he must first endure mockery and scorn. The long journey across the sea had ended, but the longer journey through silence, deception, and vengeance had only begun. Clutching a staff, he walked toward the low hills, where the smoke of a humble hut rose into the morning sky. Ithaca stretched before him, changed yet familiar, its fields scarred by neglect, its herds diminished, its spirit wounded. But he had returned. After 20 years, the soil of home lay beneath his feet, and though clothed in rags, he carried within him the heart of a king, and the fury of a father, husband, and lord betrayed. The mist lifted slowly from the island, as though the land itself held its breath, waiting for the storm that Adysius would soon unleash. The narrow path wound through stony fields, past withered olive trees and grazing swine. Smoke rose faintly from a low hut nestled in the hills. This was the dwelling of Eumaeus, swineherd of Ithaca, once prince of a distant land, now bound in servitude, yet loyal beyond measure. Adysius, bent and ragged in his beggar's guise, leaned on his staff and approached. The smell of roasting pork drifted through the air, and the sound of grunting swine mingled with the crackle of fire. Eumaeus, broad-shouldered and weathered by years of toil, stood at the doorway, cloak-patched, hands rough from labor. When his eyes fell upon the stranger, he did not turn him away, though beggars were common and trust was dangerous in Ithaca's fractured days. Instead, he spoke with gentle courtesy. "Come in, old man. The gods watch over all who wander, and though my means are poor, you shall not go hungry at my hearth." Adysius's heart swelled, though he kept his identity veiled. He entered, and Eumaeus offered him bread, wine, and a place by the fire. Together they ate, the humble meal carrying more dignity than the feasts of arrogant suitors. "Tell me, stranger," said Eumaeus, "from where do you wander? For your face bears the marks of many roads." Adysius, master of disguise, spun yet another tale. He claimed to be a Cretan warrior, blown off course, enslaved, escaped, and now cast adrift upon the seas. He spoke of battles, of storms, and of hearing whispers that Adysius himself yet lived, preparing to return to Ithaca. Eumaeus shook his head sadly. "Ah, stranger, I have heard such tales too many times. Charlatans come with lies of my master's return, seeking reward, but my heart knows the truth. He is gone. The suitors fatten themselves on his herds, dishonor his halls, and plot to wed his wife. Telemachus is too young to stand against them, though he shows his father's courage. I remain here, tending swine, as loyalty binds me, though my master will never walk this soil again." Adysius nearly wept to hear such devotion. Here was a man enslaved, stripped of birthright, yet still holding fast to faith in a master the world believed lost. The loyalty of this humble swineherd shone brighter than the wealth of kings. Night fell, and Eumaeus gave the beggar his own cloak to keep warm. He spoke of his life, born a prince, betrayed by a treacherous nurse, sold into slavery, and brought to Ithaca, where Laertes, Adysius's father, had purchased him. Yet never once had he turned bitter. "A man is measured," he said, "not by his fortune, but by his deeds. And so long as breath is in me, I will honor the house of Adysius." The disguised king listened in silence, struck by the irony. Here sat a king clothed in rags, and across from him, a servant whose soul bore the true nobility of Ithaca. For several days Adysius remained in the swineherd's hut, learning of the state of his land. He heard how the suitors devoured the flocks, how servants wavered between loyalty and betrayal, how Penelope endured in sorrow, weaving by day and unraveling by night, to delay her marriage. Each word deepened his resolve, yet he revealed nothing, waiting for the goddess's sign. One evening, as firelight danced upon the walls, Athena appeared to Adysius alone, invisible to others. "The time draws near," she whispered. "Your son Telemachus returns from Sparta. Here, in this humble hut, father and son will meet once more. Be patient, and when you reveal yourself, bind him to your cause." Adysius bowed his head. "I have endured gods, monsters, and seas. But this, seeing my son after 20 years, may be the hardest trial yet." The next morning, Eumaeus prepared to leave for the palace. to bring word of Telemachus's return to Penelope. Before he departed, he placed his hand on the beggar's shoulder. "Stay here, stranger. Guard my hut. All that I have is yours to share. You may be a wanderer, but in my home, you are safe." Adysius nodded, gratitude burning in his chest. When the swineherd's footsteps faded, the hut grew silent. Alone, the disguised king sat waiting, knowing that soon the son he had left as a babe would walk through the door, and fate would bind them together in blood and vengeance. The swineherd's hut, humble and rough, had become the stage for a reunion that would shape the fate of Ithaca. The hut was quiet, its air thick with the smoke of the hearth. Adysius, still cloaked in beggar's rags, sat on a rough bench, his eyes fixed on the doorway. His heart beat faster with every sound outside. The bleat of goats, the grunt of swine, the crunch of footsteps in the dirt. After 20 long years, he was about to see his son. The door creaked open. Telemachus stepped in, tall and broad-shouldered. No longer the boy his father had left, but not yet the man he was destined to become. His eyes carried both the fire of youth and the shadow of burden. He had returned from Sparta, wary of ambush, guided by Athena's counsel. Eumaeus greeted him with tears of joy, embracing him like a father. "Telemachus, my boy, you have come back safely. The suitors' ships prowled the seas, but Zeus must have shielded you." Telemachus smiled faintly, though worry lingered on his face. "Yes, the gods were kind, but trouble grows in Ithaca, and I fear for my mother. Have the suitors pressed her still harder?" "They feast like wolves," Eumaeus said bitterly. "They bleed your house dry, yet she endures, holding them at bay." Then the swineherd gestured toward the ragged stranger by the fire. "I have given shelter to this wanderer. He came to me in need, and I fed him. He claims to have news of your father." Telemachus's gaze fell upon Adysius. For a moment, silence stretched between them, a gulf of years and longing. The beggar bowed his head, hiding tears in his eyes. Athena appeared then, unseen by all but Adysius. She touched him lightly with her staff, and in an instant, the disguise fell away. His back straightened, his skin grew smooth, his eyes shone bright as the sea at dawn. He stood revealed, not as a beggar, but as the king of Ithaca, strong and proud. Telemachus staggered back, eyes wide. You cannot be my father. Some god deceives me, cruelly wearing his shape to break my heart." Adysius's voice trembled, yet rang with truth. "No god deceives you, my son. It is I. I am Adysius, your father, long delayed but never lost. Look upon me, see the scar upon my thigh, earned in the hunt when I was a boy. It is I, returned at last." Still Telemachus hesitated, torn between hope and fear. For years he had imagined this moment, yet dared not believe it could come true. But when Adysius stepped forward, when he clasped his son's shoulders, with hands both firm and trembling, something deeper than sight told the truth. Telemachus's face broke, and tears flooded his eyes. He fell into his father's arms, and the two wept openly, their sobs raw and unashamed. Homer himself compared their cries to the keening of eagles robbed of their young, piercing, primal, a sound born of love and grief interwoven. At last, words returned. "Father," Telemachus whispered, "I thought you lost forever. I thought I would never know your face. And I thought never to hold you," Adysius answered, pressing his forehead to his son's. "Yet here we stand, by the grace of gods and the endurance of men." When their tears had dried, resolve took their place. Adysius's eyes hardened, sharp with purpose. "Listen well, my son. Our hall is filled with vipers. Suitors gorge upon my wealth and press your mother to remarry. They mock our name, trample our honor, and plot to kill you. But the time of reckoning has come." Telemachus nodded fiercely, his youthful face alight with fire. "Then let us strike them down, father. Give me the plan, and I will stand at your side." Adysius smiled, pride and steel mingling in his gaze. "We will not rush. First, We count their number. We learn their hearts. Some servants may prove loyal, others traitors. In beggars' rags I will walk unseen, gathering knowledge. When the moment comes, we will strike together. You must be steady, for vengeance will not be swift. It will be merciless. Father and son clasped hands, the bond of blood sealing their pact. Around them, the humble hut glowed with quiet firelight, but in that glow burned the spark of a storm soon to engulf Ithaca. For 20 years, Adysius had fought monsters, gods, and seas. Now, with his son beside him, he would face the greatest trial of all, restoring his home, not by cunning alone, but by blood and justice. The plan was set. Adysius, once king, now clothed in rags, would return to the palace, not as master, but as a beggar. The disguise stung his pride, yet Athena's wisdom rang true. Only in concealment could he test the hearts of those who dwelt in his halls. Only in silence could he prepare for the storm of vengeance to come. Eumaeus, faithful as ever, guided him along the dusty path toward the palace gates. Telemachus walked ahead, entering first, so as not to draw suspicion. Adysius followed slowly, leaning on his staff, his hair matted, his face shadowed by grime. The walls of his home loomed above him, yet they no longer felt like sanctuary. They felt like enemy ground. As they entered, the scene before him struck like a dagger. His hall, once the seat of noble feasts and solemn council, was defiled by arrogance. The suitors sprawled upon couches, their bellies swollen with stolen meat and wine. Servants rushed to and fro, not in honor but in servitude to intruders. Laughter rang coarse and hollow, echoing against the high rafters where once hymns to the gods had been sung. No one recognized the beggar. To them, he was nothing, a figure to mock, a stranger beneath notice. This was his armor. Eumaeus led him to a corner, but before he could settle, a harsh voice cut through the air. Melanthius, the goatherd, strode forward, sneer twisted across his face. He had long abandoned loyalty for comfort, currying favor with the suitors. Out of the way, old man, he spat, shoving Adysius with cruel delight. This hall is no place for beggars. Crawl back to the dung heap where you belong. With a laugh, he kicked at the ragged figure, striking his hip. Adysius staggered but did not fall. Rage burned within him, yet he smothered it. Now was not the time. He lowered his gaze, enduring the insult in silence. Athena's words echoed, patience first, vengeance later. The suitors themselves noticed him then, and Antinous, their leader, sneered. Another leech come to feast on our bread and wine, as if the palace were a haven for every vagrant in Ithaca. He gestured mockingly. Feed him, if you will, but do not think I'll honor him with more than scraps. Despite the cruelty, Penelope's voice soon reached the hall. Word of the stranger had spread, and she, ever wise, summoned him. Bring the wanderer to me, she commanded. Perhaps he has news of Adysius. The suitors scoffed, but they obeyed. When the beggar was brought before her, Penelope studied him with sharp, searching eyes. Though she did not recognize the man before her, something in his bearing stirred unease. Stranger, she said, her voice calm yet edged with sorrow. Tell me of my husband, for many claim to know his fate, yet none speak true. Adysius, hiding truth within layers of lies, spun another tale. He spoke of meeting Adysius years past, of hearing of his cunning and valor, of knowing he had lived and would soon return. Each word was careful, woven with enough detail to pierce Penelope's heart, but not enough to reveal himself. Her eyes glistened with tears. If your words are true, stranger, may the gods bless you. Yet I have heard too many promises. My hope is weary, though my heart still longs. Even as they spoke, Antinous' cruelty reached new heights. When Adysius begged for bread, Antinous hurled a stool across the hall, striking him in the back. The crack of wood against flesh rang loud, and laughter erupted among the suitors. Telemachus leapt to his feet, fury blazing, but Adysius raised a hand, silencing him with a glance. He bore the insult, though his body trembled with restrained wrath. Inside, he vowed, Antinous will be the first to fall. Later that night, as the beggar rested in the shadows, he witnessed small glimmers of loyalty. Servants whispered of their grief for the absent king. An old nurse, Euryclea, prepared to wash the stranger's feet and nearly recognized a scar upon his thigh, earned long ago in a boar hunt. Adysius caught her hand before she could cry out, whispering, "Tell no one. The time has not yet come." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her loyalty unshaken. Thus, Adysius endured humiliation and insult, gathering knowledge, watching, and waiting. He saw who among the servants remained faithful and who betrayed him. He measured the arrogance of each suitor, storing every detail in his heart like arrows in a quiver. In rags he walked unseen, but within burned the fire of a king. Each insult sharpened his resolve. Each kindness reminded him what he must protect. Soon, Penelope would set the contest of the bow. Soon, the beggar would cast off his rags and reveal himself in blood and vengeance. But for now, patience was his weapon. He walked among the suitors not as victim, but as hunter, and they, blind to their doom, feasted in his hall as though gods would never demand justice. The days in the palace dragged on, heavy with mockery and hidden rage. Adysius endured insult after insult, his rags a shield as he watched the suitors devour his wealth and dishonor his halls. But soon the tide would turn. Penelope, ever wise, devised a plan that would test them all, a contest only her true husband could win. Before the gathered suitors, she spoke with calm authority. "You have courted me long and filled this hall with arrogance, but the time has come to choose. Here is the bow of Adysius, my husband, a gift once given him by the hero Eurytus. Whoever can string this bow and shoot an arrow clean through 12 axe heads shall win my hand." A murmur rose among the suitors. They laughed, confident, yet unease rippled beneath their bravado, for the bow was no common weapon. Its curve was mighty, its string stiff with age, a weapon forged for the hands of a king. The bow was brought forth, wrapped in linen, its polished wood gleaming in the firelight. Eumaeus, loyal swineherd, and Philoetius, the steadfast cowherd, wept at the sight of it, for to them it was not just a weapon, but a memory of their absent lord. Antinous, leader of the suitors, sneered, "This contest will prove my strength. Soon Penelope will be mine." He grasped the bow, bracing it against his knee, straining with all his might. Yet the string would not bend. His face flushed, his hands trembled, and sweat beaded his brow. At last, he cast it aside with a growl, masking failure with scorn. One by one the suitors tried. Eurymachus, strong of arm, gritted his teeth until veins bulged in his neck, but the bow defied him. Others fared no better. Laughter turned to murmurs, murmurs to unease. Their pride shriveled beneath the silent challenge of the unyielding wood. Meanwhile, Adysius watched from the shadows, his heart steady. This was the moment Athena had promised. His patience, his disguise, his long suffering, it would all lead here. At last, Eurymachus cursed aloud. "No man here is fit to string this bow. Does it shame us to admit that none can match the strength of one long lost?" Penelope stood silent, her face unreadable. Telemachus, seizing the moment, spoke boldly. "Then let us allow this stranger, this beggar, to try. What harm can it do? If he fails, he is only what he appears. If he succeeds, then perhaps the gods favor him." Outrage filled the hall. Antinous leapt to his feet. "Never shall we allow a filthy beggar to mock us with his hands upon a king's bow." But Telemachus insisted. "This house is mine as much as yours, Antinous, and I say the stranger shall have his chance." The bow was brought to Adysius. He took it gently, as a musician lifts his lyre. With calm hands he examined the wood, running his fingers along the curve, testing the string. Murmurs rippled through the suitors. Was he mocking them? Then, with the ease of long memory, he braced the bow against his foot, bent it smoothly, and set the string in place. The sound it made was clear and sharp, like the song of a swallow. Silence fell. Adysius selected an arrow from the quiver. He set it upon the string, drew back, and sighted down the shaft. His eyes burned not with effort, but with purpose. The suitors leaned forward, breath caught in their throats. The arrow flew, straight as fate. It passed through the line of 12 axe heads, splitting the air with deadly grace. It struck true, thudding into the wood beyond. The hall was frozen. Then Adysius lowered the bow. His rag seemed to fall away in spirit, if not in form, and his voice rang out with the force of thunder. The contest is ended. Another target remains, one no man has yet struck. His gaze fixed upon Antinous, who raised a wine cup to his lips, still smirking with disdain. Adysius drew another arrow, his hand steady as stone. He loosed. The shaft struck Antinous in the throat. The cup fell from his hand, spilling crimson wine that mingled with blood upon the floor. He toppled backward, his feet kicking, his eyes wide in shock. Chaos erupted. The suitors shouted, leaping to their feet. But Adysius's voice cut through the din. "You dogs, you devoured my house, dishonored my wife, and plotted my son's death. Did you think I would never return? Now death's cords have tightened around you all." And so the reckoning began. The silence after Antinous fell lasted only a heartbeat. His body sprawled across the floor, the wine cup overturned, crimson liquid mingling with his blood. Then chaos erupted. The suitors leapt to their feet, their faces pale with shock, their voices shrill with terror. "It was an accident," cried one. The beggar misfired. But Adysius's voice thundered over them, steady and merciless. "Not accident, justice. You thought me dead. You devoured my wealth, shamed my household, and sought to steal my wife. But I am Adysius, king of Ithaca, and your doom has come." Recognition spread across their faces. Some gasped in horror, others in disbelief, others in rage. Yet all knew the truth. The man they had mocked and abused was the very king they had betrayed. Eurymachus, desperate, stepped forward, hands raised. "Spare us, Lord. Antinous was the ringleader. He drove us to this outrage. Slay him, and let the rest live. We will repay all we have taken, with gold, with oxen, with gifts beyond measure." But Adysius's eyes blazed. "No ransom, no repayment. Your blood alone can cleanse this hall." With that, he loosed another arrow. It struck Eurymachus in the chest, piercing his heart. He staggered, gasping, then fell lifeless beside his companion. The hall dissolved into panic. The suitors rushed for weapons, but Telemachus had hidden the arms earlier at his father's command. Their hands found only empty racks. "The doors," one shouted. "Break free." But the loyal cowherd Philoetius and the swineherd Eumaeus barred the exits, spears in hand, faces grim. Trapped, the suitors turned in desperation. One charged forward with a makeshift spear, but Telemachus met him with steel. The young prince's blade pierced a man's side, and for the first time, he shed blood in defense of his house. Father and son stood together, side by side, the storm of vengeance unleashed. Adysius fired arrow after arrow, each one finding its mark. The hall rang with screams, with the thud of bodies, with the crash of overturned tables. Food spilled, wine splattered, and blood ran across the polished floor in dark rivers. The suitors, once predators, became prey. Athena herself appeared in the rafters, disguised as mentor, her presence filling the hall with dread. She did not yet strike, but her eyes glowed with divine approval, urging the king to prove his strength. "Stand firm, Adysius," she called. "This is the justice long promised." Encouraged, Adysius cast aside the bow once his arrows were spent. He and Telemachus armed themselves with spears and swords, their loyal servants beside them. Together they advanced, cutting down man after man. Blades flashed, throats opened, and cries for mercy rose, but none was granted. One suitor slipped in the blood and fell, crying out to the gods. Another tried to climb the wall, scrambling like a rat, only to be speared through the back. Tables overturned became barricades, but they offered no salvation. The hall was a trap, and the hunters moved with relentless purpose. Still, resistance was fierce. The suitors, though corrupt, were not cowards when faced with death. Some seized stools, cups, or shattered spears, hurling them wildly. A stool struck Telemachus on the shoulder, bruising but not breaking him. Adysius himself was grazed by a spear that tore his arm, but rage fueled him onward. Blood mist filled the air. The cries of the dying mingled with the clash of bronze. The once great hall of Ithaca echoed, not with music, but with slaughter. At last, Athena raised her aegis, the shield of terror. Its dread power froze the suitors where they stood, their courage shattered. They cowered, wailing like cattle before the butcher's knife. Adysius and his allies struck them down without mercy, driving blades through hearts, throats, and bellies until none stood. The hall grew still. Bodies littered the floor, sprawled across overturned tables, their faces pale, their mouths frozen in screams. The air reeked of blood and smoke. Adysius stood among the dead, his chest heaving, his sword dripping. He was like a lion after the kill, his mane matted with gore, his eyes burning with unspent fury. Telemachus stood at his side, scarred but unbroken, his youth hardened by battle. The suitors were no more. Justice had come with arrows and steel, yet vengeance was not complete. Still there remained the matter of the faithless servants, those who had betrayed their master's house, and beyond that, Penelope, who waited upstairs, unaware that her husband had returned in blood and fire. Adysius wiped his blade upon a fallen cloak, then turned to his son. "It is done," he said, though his voice was heavy. "But the cleansing is not yet finished. The house must be purged, the loyal separated from the false. Only then will Ithaca be ours again." The hall was silent now, save for the low crackle of torches and the drip of blood pooling across the stone. Bodies of the suitors lay strewn about, twisted and broken, their feasts of wine and meat replaced by the stench of death. The vengeance of Adysius had been swift and merciless, but the work of justice was not yet done. Adysius lowered his sword, his eyes scanning the ruined hall. His breath came hard, but his will remained iron. He turned to Telemachus, to Eumaeus, to Philoetius, their faces pale yet steadfast. "The suitors are finished," he said, his voice heavy. "But betrayal still festers within these walls. Those who forgot their oaths, who served the suitors in secret pleasure, must answer for their treachery." Telemachus nodded grimly. "I know them, father. 12 women of the household, who defiled their duty by lying with the suitors, mocking my mother's sorrow, and dishonoring our name. They have watched your hall decay and welcomed it." At his words, Euryclea, the aged nurse who had once bathed Adysius as a child, emerged trembling from the shadows. She had been among the first to recognize her master by the scar upon his thigh, and her loyalty was beyond question. Bowing low, tears streaming, she spoke. "My lord, I will name them. 12 there are, shameless in their betrayal. But others, many others, remain faithful, even in hardship. Spare them, for they are innocent." Adysius's gaze softened. "So be it. The faithful will be honored, but the guilty must pay." Euryclea hurried to summon the disloyal maids. They came reluctantly, their faces painted with fear and defiance. Some wept, others sneered, still clinging to the arrogance of their former lovers. But when they entered the blood-soaked hall, the sight of the corpses broke what little courage they possessed. Adysius stood before them, towering though still stained in beggar's rags. "You betrayed your queen," he declared, "and with your treachery, you soiled this house. You chose lust over loyalty, mockery over duty. There is no place in Ithaca for such faithlessness." The women fell to their knees, some begging for mercy, others silent with shame. But mercy was not his to give. He ordered them first to clean the hall, every table, every stone, every pool of blood. Their hands shook as they scrubbed the gore. their tears falling into the crimson stains. The sight was grim. Those who had sullied the house now purging it with their last labor. When the work was done, Adysius gave the command. Telemachus led them outside, to the courtyard beneath the pale moon. There, ropes were fastened, and one by one, the faithless were hanged. Their bodies swung in the night air, a final warning to all who would betray their oaths. Yet even this was not the end. Melanthius, the treacherous goatherd who had armed the suitors and mocked Adysius, still lived. He had been captured, bound, and dragged before the king. His eyes darted wildly, his voice shrill with terror. "Spare me, Lord. I was forced to obey them. I had no choice." But Adysius's face was stone. "You chose mockery when loyalty demanded silence. You chose betrayal when honor demanded faith. There is no place for you among the living." The punishment was harsh, fitting his treason. His nose, ears, hands, and feet were cut away, his body thrown to the dogs. The loyalty he had scorned was repaid in kind with dishonor beyond death. At last, the hall was cleansed. The stench of blood remained, but Euryclea brought forth sulfur and fire, fumigating the rooms, purging corruption not only with steel, but with ritual purity. Flames licked the walls, smoke curled into the rafters, and slowly, the house felt once again like a place of the living, not the dead. When it was done, Adysius sat upon the high seat, his rightful throne. The survivors, Telemachus, Eumaeus, Philoetius, and the loyal servants, gathered around him. Their faces shone with awe and fear alike, for the king had returned not as the gentle lord of old, but as a lion drenched in blood. Yet beneath the fury, a gentler trial awaited. Penelope still lay upstairs, unaware that her husband had returned. The hall was cleansed of enemies, but the queen's heart remained bound in doubt. Adysius knew. Only one test remained, the most delicate of all. Not to slay, not to command, but to be recognized, to win again the trust of the woman who had guarded his name with 20 years of silence. And so, with the palace purified and vengeance fulfilled, Adysius turned his gaze upward, toward the chamber where Penelope slept. For 20 years, he had dreamed of this moment. Now it had come, and it would demand from him not strength of arm, but truth of heart. The palace was cleansed, the suitors destroyed, the faithless punished. Yet as Adysius sat amidst the silence of victory, he knew his greatest test had not yet come. Penelope remained in her chamber, shielded by doubt, by 20 years of disappointment, by the fragile balance between hope and despair she had carried for so long. Euryclea, loyal nurse, hurried upstairs to tell her mistress the news. Breathless, she cried, "Rejoice, dear child. Adysius has returned. He has slain the suitors with his own hands. Your king is home again." But Penelope's face, pale and weary, did not brighten. Instead, her brows furrowed. "My faithful nurse," she said softly. "The gods can work strange wonders. Perhaps a stranger has come. Perhaps a divine power has punished the suitors. But do not deceive me with dreams. My heart has endured too many false hopes to surrender now." Even when she descended to the hall and saw the man seated there, cleansed of blood and clothed in fresh garments, she hesitated. His bearing was noble, his gaze commanding. Telemachus cried out, "Mother, why do you not run to him? Do you not see? This is my father." But Penelope stood still, her hands clasped tightly. If he is truly Adysius, he will prove it. We two share secrets no other knows. Adysius watched her, admiration mingling with sorrow. This, he thought, was why he had endured, why he had fought through storm and battle, why he had risked all to return, not merely for his throne, but for this woman whose wisdom matched his own, whose caution mirrored his craft. He did not reproach her hesitation. Instead, he spoke gently. "Let her test me. Her caution is wisdom, not doubt." To create space for their trial, he ordered the hall filled with music and dancing, so that those outside would hear celebration, not the aftermath of slaughter. Then Penelope gave her quiet command. Bring forth the royal bed, and make it ready for our guest." At these words, Adysius's heart leapt. He saw the trap immediately. That bed could not be moved. He himself had built it long ago, carving the chamber around a living olive tree, whose trunk formed the bed's very foundation. No man alive could shift it. Only he and Penelope knew its secret. Anger flared in his voice, though it was righteous anger, born of wounded love. "Woman, you cut me to the quick. Who has dared move my bed? No mortal hand could alter it, unless some god himself had come and torn the olive from its roots." He rose, his eyes fierce, and began to describe the bed in detail: the polished frame, the ivory inlay, the golden clasps, the living olive tree that anchored it to the earth. Every word was exact, every memory clear. At once, Penelope's composure broke. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. She rushed forward, her voice trembling. "Do not be angry with me. Always my heart feared that some stranger might trick me with words, that I might give myself to a lie. But now, with this sign, I know you truly are my husband, my Adysius." She fell into his arms, and at last, the king and queen were reunited. Tears streamed freely down their faces as they embraced, the years of loneliness and longing dissolving in that single moment. Their cries were likened to the desperate weeping of shipwrecked sailors who finally sight land, who feel earth beneath their feet after endless storms. For Adysius, this embrace was the true end of his Odyssey. They clung to each other, and the hull seemed to fade away. Telemachus watched with quiet awe, as if witnessing something sacred. The servants wept as well, for in their reunion they saw the restoration not just of love, but of order, of hope, of Ithaca itself. All night they spoke, their words weaving together the 20 years of separation into one shared fabric. Adysius told her of his wanderings, the Cyclops, Circe, the Sirens, the cattle of Helios, the whirlpool of Charybdis. Penelope told him of her tricks against the suitors, her weaving and unweaving, her steadfast endurance. Each tale was both new and familiar, for though they had lived apart, they had carried each other always in memory. Athena herself held back the dawn, lengthening the night, so that husband and wife might have the time denied them for so many years. It was not merely the reunion of two lovers, but the restoration of a bond sanctified by time, tested by hardship, and proven unbreakable. At last, when exhaustion claimed them, they rested together, not as strangers reunited, but as partners restored. Their marriage bed, rooted in living wood, symbolized their union, unshaken, unmovable, enduring even against the storms of gods and fate. Yet even as peace washed over them, shadows lingered. For Adysius remembered the prophecy of Tiresias. His journey was not yet complete, and outside the palace walls, the families of the slain suitors murmured of vengeance. But for this night, at least, the storm was stilled. Adysius had returned. Penelope had recognized him. The house of Ithaca was whole once more. The dawn after their reunion came softly, with the sound of doves stirring in the olive groves. For the first time in 20 years, Adysius lay beside Penelope, no longer haunted by disguise or separation. Yet peace, though sweet, was fragile. He knew the blood of the suitors would cry out to their families, and vengeance would not rest. Before the storm could gather again, there was one last duty of the heart, to see his father, Laertes. Laertes, once king of Ithaca, had long since retreated to his farm on the island's edge. The grief of losing his son had withered him. Clad in rags, his body bent with age, he spent his days digging among fruit trees, tending to orchards with hands calloused and broken. Though he had been a lord of men, he lived now as a servant to the earth, humbling himself before sorrow. Adysius set out to him, bringing Telemachus and loyal companions. As they neared the orchard, they found the old man bent low, hoeing around the roots of a fig tree. His back was stooped, his clothes patched, his head crowned not with a diadem but with dust. Tears welled in Adysius's eyes at the sight. The man who had once carried him as a child now carried the weight of despair. For a moment, Adysius could not reveal himself. True to his nature, he chose first to test, to measure the heart of his father. Approaching as a stranger, he spoke gently. "Old man, whose orchard is this, tended with such care, and whose hands shaped the soil, though clearly they are noble by birth?" Laertes, weary, straightened slightly and answered in a broken voice. "This orchard is mine, though I am no longer master. I was once king, Laertes by name, but sorrow stole my strength. My son, Adysius, he who should have ruled, has long been lost. Some say he roams the seas, others that he lies dead in foreign earth. For his sake, I wear rags, and for his sake, I live among the trees." Hearing these words, Adysius's heart ached. Yet still he pressed the test further, weaving another tale, as he had done so often. "I once knew him," he said, voice steady though his soul trembled. "Years ago, he visited my halls, a noble man, fierce-eyed, swift of wit. He promised he would return to Ithaca." At this, Laertes groaned, covering his head with dust, as if the grief of hearing his son's name again were too much to bear. His legs buckled beneath him. He fell to the earth, mourning anew. Adysius could endure no longer. Rushing forward, he clasped his father in his arms. "Father," it is I. "Look at me. Your son has come home." Laertes blinked, dazed, certain this was some cruel trick. "No," he whispered. "The gods mock me. My son is gone." But Adysius pressed on, proving himself with the most intimate of signs. "Do you not remember the orchard you gave me when I was a boy? You walked me through these very rows, naming each tree as a gift. 13 pear trees, 10 apple trees, 40 fig trees, vines heavy with grapes, all mine by your hand. Who but your son could name them?" Recognition broke through Laertes' haze. His eyes widened, his breath caught, and with a cry, he embraced Adysius fully. "My child, my son, you are alive." Their weeping echoed through the orchard, the tears of 2 generations reunited after decades of loss. Telemachus, standing nearby, felt his own heart swell. 3 generations now stood together: Laertes, the aged root; Adysius, the weathered trunk; Telemachus, the green branch reaching toward the future. Strength returned to the old man, as if years had fallen away. He stood taller, his spirit rekindled by the joy of reunion. "I feared I would go to Hades without seeing you again," Laertes said, his voice thick. "But the gods are merciful. You have come home, and my eyes behold the son I mourned." Adysius clasped his hand. "You shall see not only me, but also your grandson grown to a man. Telemachus has proven himself worthy, standing at my side in battle." Laertes' eyes gleamed with pride as he looked upon the boy. "Then the line of Ithaca endures. My heart is full." For a brief time, joy overshadowed all fear. They sat together beneath the orchard trees, sharing food, wine, and stories. Adysius told of his trials. Laertes spoke of his years of solitude. Telemachus listened, absorbing the legacy of his house. Yet even as they rejoiced, a shadow gathered on the horizon. Word spread quickly across Ithaca. The families of the slain suitors, led by Antinous' father, Eupaeus, armed themselves for vengeance. The island teetered on the edge of civil war. But for this moment, among the trees his father had planted, Adysius felt the circle of life restored. He was son, husband, and father once more. His long journey had brought him not only home, but back to his roots. The storm to come could not erase the sweetness of this embrace. 3 generations of Ithaca stood united, prepared to face whatever destiny awaited them together. The orchard echoed with the voices of reunion, Adysius and Laertes embracing, Telemachus standing proudly at their side. But far from this peaceful grove, another gathering was taking place. In the halls of Ithaca, the families of the slain suitors assembled, their grief sharpened into fury. Fathers, brothers, and sons, clutching spears and shields, raised their voices in outrage. Among them stood Eupaeus, father of Antinous, his face hard with sorrow and rage. He raised his arms to the crowd. Shall we sit idle while our children lie butchered in their own king's hall? Shall we endure this man who has returned from shadows only to slaughter the flower of Ithaca? He has stained our land with blood. Today we avenge our dead or perish in disgrace. The cry was taken up by the mob. Grief and anger fused into resolve, and soon a war band marched, their weapons glinting in the sun. News of this reached the orchard quickly. A loyal messenger, breathless from running, fell before Adysius. "My lord, they come, armed, many in number, thirsting for vengeance. The island is aflame with rage." Adysius rose, fire flashing in his eyes. "So be it. I have faced greater hosts than these. If they seek my blood, they shall find bronze and death instead." But Laertes placed a trembling hand upon his son's arm. Though old, his voice carried weight. "We must be wise, my child. This is not the war of Troy. These are our kinsmen, our neighbors. Slay them, and Ithaca may never know peace again." Still, Adysius armed himself, as did Telemachus and the loyal servants. Laertes, too, took up a spear, though his body was frail. He would not stand idle while his house was threatened. 3 generations together, bound by blood and by battle, prepared to meet the storm. The clash came swiftly. Eupaeus and his men descended upon the farm, their cries filling the air. Bronze clashed against bronze, dust rose in clouds, and the orchard became a battlefield. Telemachus fought fiercely, cutting down a warrior who rushed him. Eumaeus and Philoetius stood shoulder to shoulder, loyal as ever. Laertes, despite his age, hurled his spear with sudden strength, guided by Athena's unseen hand. It struck Eupaeus through the throat, the leader of the Avengers collapsing in a spray of blood. The death of their captain shook the war band, but rage still burned in their eyes. The fighting might have descended into endless bloodshed, Ithacon against Ithacon, were it not for the goddess. From Olympus, Zeus had watched, his heart weary of strife. He spoke to Athena. "Daughter, enough. The man has returned, the guilty punished, the order restored. Will you let mortals drown Ithaca in civil war? Go now and end it." Athena descended, her form blazing, clad in armor that shone brighter than the sun. She appeared above the battlefield, and her voice thundered like a storm. "Stop this madness," she cried. "Lay down your arms, men of Ithaca. Enough blood has been spilled. Will you destroy yourselves, father against son, neighbor against neighbor? The gods decree peace." Fear gripped the warriors. Their spears trembled in their hands. Their rage faltered. Against such divine power, none could stand. One by one, they dropped their weapons, eyes lowered in shame and awe. Adysius, still burning with wrath, stood ready to strike again. But Athena fixed him with her stern gaze. "Hold, son of Laertes. Do not undo with your anger what you have built with your endurance. Your trials have ended. Accept peace, and let Ithaca heal." At last Adysius obeyed. His chest heaved, his grip loosened, and his sword lowered. Around him, silence spread, the kind of silence that follows thunder. Athena declared the pact. No vengeance, no retribution, no more blood. The suitors were punished, the households cleansed, and the line of Adysius restored. Ithaca would know peace, not endless war. With a final crack of divine thunder, she vanished, leaving mortals to their fate. But her will remained, stamped into their hearts. None dared raise a weapon again. Adysius turned to his father and son. Together, they stood as the living bond of Ithaca's future. The cycle of blood had ended, not by mortal strength alone, but by divine decree. Thus the island was spared from ruin, and the long journey of the king found its final stillness. The wrath of men had been silenced, and order, fragile yet real, had been restored. Peace had returned to Ithaca. The battlefield was quiet, the orchard once again filled with the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. The blood of the suitors had long since seeped into the earth, but the cries of vengeance had been silenced by Athena's command. What remained was a fragile calm, one born not of conquest, but of divine decree and human endurance. Adysius stood with his father and his son. 3 generations joined together in triumph and survival. Laertes, though aged, carried himself with renewed strength, his heart unburdened after years of grief. Telemachus, once a hesitant youth, now bore himself with the steadiness of a man who had fought beside his father and proven his worth. And Adysius himself, scarred by wandering, tempered by loss, and remade by struggle, finally stood whole again, husband, son, father, and king. The palace was purified, the halls restored. Servants once cowed by the arrogance of the suitors now moved freely, their loyalty reaffirmed. Penelope, ever watchful, ever wise, stood at her husband's side, not merely as queen, but as the equal partner who had safeguarded Ithaca in his absence. Her cleverness, her patience, her refusal to yield had preserved what Odysseus' strength alone could not. Together they embodied the dual pillars of rule, cunning and courage, endurance and might. Yet even in this moment of restoration, the story did not close fully. Adysius remembered the words of Tiresias, spoken in the underworld, that his journey was not yet complete. One day, he must take up an oar and walk inland until he reached a place where men knew nothing of the sea, where the oar would be mistaken for a winnowing fan. There he would make sacrifice to Poseidon and at last bring balance to his long struggle against the god of the deep. Peace in Ithaca, though hard won, was never meant to be eternal stasis. The hero's fate was always to move, to wander, to reconcile the unending tension between journey and home. But for now, Ithaca breathed. The people looked once more to their rightful king. Justice had been served, the gods had spoken, and order had been restored. Songs began to spread across the island, songs of the suitors' arrogance, of Penelope's endurance, of Telemachus' courage, and above all, of Odysseus' return. The bards would carry these tales beyond Ithaca's shores, weaving them into the fabric of memory so that no generation would forget. Time, however, would add its own layers. Some would tell the story as one of vengeance and blood, a grim lesson on the price of hubris. Others would see it as a love story, the unbreakable bond of husband and wife tested by decades of separation. Still others would frame it as the journey of the human spirit, ever torn between exile and belonging, between wandering and homecoming. In truth, the tale contained them all. Laertes, old yet at peace, passed his final days not in despair, but in quiet pride, knowing his son had returned and his line endured. Telemachus, sharpened by trial, began to step into the mantle of leadership, his name tied forever to the defense of his father's hall. And Adysius, though still marked by prophecy, walked through his land at last as one who belonged, not as a stranger in disguise, not as a beggar mocked, but as a king restored. In the quiet hours of night, he would sit beneath the olive tree around which he had built his marriage bed. Its roots, sunk deep into Ithaca's soil, mirrored the roots he had reclaimed in his own life. For all his journeys across seas and among monsters, it was here, in the enduring presence of the living tree, that his greatest truth lay. Home was not merely a place, but the bond between those who knew and loved him. And so the Odyssey of Adysius did not end with the slaughter of enemies, or even the embrace of his queen. It ended in the recognition of what had always endured: faithfulness, resilience, and the fragile, irreplaceable joy of belonging. The story, carried on the lips of poets and the hearts of listeners, would travel far beyond Ithaca, far beyond Greece, echoing across centuries. It would remind each generation that the path of life is never straight nor easy, that it bends through storms and temptations, through disguises and revelations, through the loss of companions and the rediscovery of self. But it would also whisper the enduring promise that no matter how far we wander, no matter how much we suffer, the possibility of return remains. That home, whether in a place, in a family, or in the embrace of one who knows us truly, is the gift waiting at the end of a storm. Thus, the Odyssey lived on, not only as the tale of a single man, but as the mirror of every soul's journey. The sea stretches endlessly, the gods still watch from above, and humanity still wanders, still yearns, still strives to return. Adysius' story had ended, but the Odyssey itself would never die.